Hi, I'm Joe Klink. My husband Tim and I lead the Aviation Club, and this month we have our special guest, Dwight Anderson, who is a resident of Telladora, and he will be joining us to speak about air traffic control. Hi, Dwight. Welcome.
Hi, Joe. Thank you.
It's good to have you. We're looking forward to your talk about air traffic control. We all are interested in air traffic control because we all fly and we want to be safe when we fly. So, Dwight, I understand you've been an air traffic controller for 20 years. Can you tell us a little bit about what brought you to become an air traffic controller and your career path?
Sure. Yeah, I wanted to become wanted to be involved in aviation as a pilot when I was a little boy. So by the time I was in high school, I got my private pilot's license. And then after that, within a couple of years, I got my instrument rating. And then after that, I was in the U.S. Navy for 4 years. And after the U.S. Navy, or during in the U.S. Navy, I was an aviation structural mechanic. And then after that, when I got out of the Navy, I was a flight instructor for a year. And there was no aviation flying type jobs available other than flight instruction at that time. So a friend of mine was working in the tower at the airport I was working at. And he said, why don't you apply for air traffic control? So I did. And I got hired about 6 months later at Chicago Center. So that's where I started my air traffic control career.
Sounds like you've done just about every job in the aviation field. You've been a commercial pilot, you've been a private pilot, a mechanic, and an air traffic controller. So you could probably speak on many topics, but we're glad you're going to be speaking about air traffic control this time. Dwight, when we think of air traffic control, many of us think of those tall towers that we see at the airports. Is that where air traffic control takes place?
Well, that's where some of it takes place. That's where it starts. On the ground, for instance, if you take off from Fort Myers and you're going to go to Chicago, you would talk to the ground control at Fort Myers. And then after that, you would talk to the air tower controller, which would clear you for takeoff.
So wait, we have a ground controller, then we have a tower controller. And are both of those people in the tall tower that we see at the airport?
They both are. They have to both see out the window so they can control the airplanes that way. And then after they take off, then they're cleared to departure control, which is a small area around the airport, which is radar control. The person does not see you. He's looking at your radar target.
So that person is not even able to look out a window. He's in a room with radar.
He is. That's right, yeah. So then after that, he'll switch you to the center controller, which is Miami Center at this point in time. And Miami Center will get you going northbound until you talk to the next center, which would be Jacksonville Center, and it goes on up the road towards Chicago.
And as a center, can you tell us what a center is?
Yeah, a center is just a big building with a lot of controllers in it. There could be maybe 200-300 controllers in there, and they work all the airplanes en route across the country. There's 20 centers in the U.S.
Okay. And then after you talk to the center, who do you talk to?
After you talk to the center, you're coming to Chicago. So you're going to talk to Chicago Approach Control first. They will get you lined up and spaced with other airplanes. And then they will switch you over to tower control at O'Hare. And then after that, they'll switch you to ground control, who will clear you to the gate.
Well, that's quite a process, isn't it? Can you tell us what you did when you were a controller? What part of that whole scenario would be what you would do?
Well, I worked inbounds and outbounds from O'Hare on the east side of the airport. So if airplanes were coming from Cleveland Center, from the northeast or from the east, I would get them, and I had to put them single file over a certain fix on the ground called Pullman, which is a VOR. So what I would do is we get a bunch of airplanes kind of in a whole irregular pattern, just spaced all over the place. But they're all going fast, and they're all up at high altitude, and they're jets. So what you had to do was make a plan real quick. How are you going to set them up in line, what speed you're going to use, and what altitude you're going to go to. So then you start with altitude control, so that you don't hit the other airplanes, and you start turning airplanes out and fanning them out, and slowing them down, descending the back ones first, and then you turn them back in line, try and keep about 7 or 8 miles in trail between these airplanes, and then turn them over to the next controller, which is the terminal controller at the center.
Okay.
Yeah.
It sounds like it was a puzzle that you had to put the pieces together. Is that a good analogy?
You are solving a puzzle. It's kind of like a three-dimensional chess game, because you really have to think in 3 dimensions, because you got altitude and course, and of course speeds and those kind of things. So all this has to work together in order to...
How many airplanes would you be talking with at one time?
Well, that would depend, but normally if you're working an inbound rush, you're going to be working about 15 to 20 airplanes at one time.
Wow, that's a lot.
Yeah,
That's
it
a lot
is
of
a lot.
responsibility. Dwight, what was it like being a controller?
Well, every day was different. You came to work, you didn't know what to expect. The one thing you did know for sure, if there was weather, it was kind of like, okay, what's going to happen today? Because when there's weather out there, it's chaos. The pilots don't want to go anywhere near the weather. We had to plan a route to get those airplanes into O'Hare. Nowadays, it's different. They have a central control command center in Washington, D.C., and they get together with all the centers in the morning and decide the best routes for those airplanes to get to their destination. But they didn't have that back then, so we had to make the plans up and talk to the other centers and ask them for so much in trail and whatever they needed. They could give us. The more in trail, the better, because
You mean the farther the distance you
between
could
the
put
airplanes.
between the airplanes?
Right. Yeah.
Would you say your job was harrowing, or challenging, or boring? Or
It wasn't boring. It was not boring. It was challenging. Yeah, I don't think it was scary, but it was just you had to make a plan and make it work, and then you had to have a backup plan in case that plan didn't work, and a backup to the backup plan, because you sometimes
and things would change.
Things changed all the time.
And what kind of qualities would you say are important in an air traffic controller?
You have to be able to think in 3 dimensions, and you have to be flexible, because you're not going to get what you want. You just have to work with it. You can't get mad, because that doesn't do any good. You just got to stay calm and work through it. So.
And you have many planes at different altitudes and different directions, so you have to just work to get them in order. Is that right?
Well, that's true. You're probably working all jets, but they're coming from different directions.
So if
You
a
gotta space 'em out.
person wants things neat and orderly, is that
They're not going to get
probably not going to be a good air
You're not going to
traffic
get
controller?
that, right? But would you have to send that to the next controller?
Good.
But what you get is a whole different thing.
Wow.
You got to like that kind of thing.
So Dwight, when you speak to us, will you be able to show us and maybe even let us listen to some air traffic control conversation between pilots and controllers?
Yeah, I have several videos that we can show that'll kind of demonstrate what center controllers and approach controllers do.
So people will be able to understand a little more what goes on when they're
Oh, they'll-
flying on a
they'll see
commercial
it.
plane.
Right.
So
They'll see that, yeah.
that'll be very interesting. Well, we welcome you to attend our Aviation Club. It will be April 26th. That's a Thursday at 1:15 in the afternoon, and you're all welcome. Please join us.